US President Joe Biden and South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol will meet for their first summit on Saturday. The two leaders visited a Samsung chip plant on Friday after Joe Biden arrived in South Korea. For more on that, let's cross live to our correspondent Jack Barton in Seoul. Jack, this is supposed to be a very high-profile visit both for Biden and newly elected South Korean president, but we see protests behind you. Why?
Yeah, we've got a small protest over there, about a dozen people protesting against the US alliance. There was another protest about 15 minutes ago with about 45 people. They were protesting against things like South Korea potentially joining the Quad. They were protesting against strategic weapon deployment, against the action plan that President Yoon is talking about, an agreement with President Biden here, and other aspects of the joint alliance. It's worth remembering that President Yoon actually insisted that these groups be allowed to protest out the front of the meeting, saying, it was essential to South Korea's freedom of speech. He might be glad that he actually did so. The demonstrations have turned out to be so small that the police actually removed the barriers when they saw how many people there were, and the riot police who gathered went back to their buses. And perhaps the tiny number, literally there's about a dozen people there, perhaps reinforces what the polls show over and over again, that the majority of South Koreans actually support the alliance. Having said that, though, a majority of people here also support South Korea building its own deterrence rather than relying on the United States.
So let's follow on that deterrence topic. What kind of deterrence are, as you just mentioned, South Korean people are demanding? And tell us a little bit more about the major items on the agenda for the two leaders.
Yeah, there's really two big areas that we're seeing the two presidents discussing here: military security and economic security. Biden, of course, making his first stop last night at a huge Samsung semiconductor plant where he talked about this need given the geopolitical risks, and he was talking about Russia and Ukraine. But we know that the US is also inferring China in all of this and sort of talking about creating this insulated supply chain. Effectively, it would block China out of the supply chain in the region. I think it's going to be a tough sell for many countries in the region, but President Yoon here has said South Korea will likely sign on to this agreement given the disruption that's going on at the moment. This visit also comes at a time of heightened tensions on the peninsula, of course, because of the record number of DPRK missile tests so far this year, but also because there is an expectation there could be another long-range missile test, even a nuclear bomb test at any time. Officials here and in the US saying they are seeing the preparations underway. So President Yoon and Biden expected to arrive just at the gate you can see back just behind me, really any minute, for that 90-minute face-to-face where the DPRK denuclearization, that's supposed to be the number one topic, but also these trade issues. After that, they're going to broaden it out into a wider meeting with many different officials. And then at the end of today, they're going to wrap up their talks with a big dinner at which the heads of big conglomerates like Samsung, like SK, Hyundai Motors, they will all join the discussions. And again, it's going to come back to this supply line security, digital technology security. And that will really wrap up this summit before Biden then heads to Japan on Sunday for talks on Monday. Again, looking at this supply line issue and the DPRK, but really trying to cement what Biden is calling the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. That's really the key to what he's trying to achieve here.
Thank you very much. Our correspondent Jack Barton in Seoul. Now, for more insight into Biden's visit to South Korea, let's talk to Mr. Einar Tangen in Beijing. He's a political and economics affairs commentator. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Tangen. So let's start with Biden's visit to Samsung computer chip plant on Friday. He did this right after his arrival, even before his official meeting with the South Korean president. We know the United States has long boasted itself as a world leader in semiconductor technology and industry, while all of a sudden it's sorting to countries like South Korea for this manufacturing capacity and talking about supply chains.
Yes. Well, I mean, last year in November, the Samsung announced a $17 billion investment in Texas to create a semiconductor plant there. This is very much in line with the Biden administration, what they want to do. They've done the same thing in Taiwan. They use security concerns to try to drive companies to locate their future plants in the United States, all part of setting up a situation where they can, in essence, control the supply lines and keep them away from China.
Let's talk about the nuclear issue, of course, the Korean Peninsula denuclearization issue as well. Now, the summit between Biden and Yoon will reportedly touch on strengthening American, quote, extended deterrence against DPRK. Have you seen a clear DPRK strategy from the Biden administration since he took office? And do you think really this is the best way to approach the issue?
Well, from a personal point of view, absolutely not. It's not clear what the strategy is, this extended deterrence. I mean, there's a nuclear umbrella over South Korea. I don't know how much more extended you can get. If the desire is to sell more arms and also missiles, defensive and offensive, to South Korea, that could well be in his mind. But you heard from Jack Barton earlier. The issue right now is that South Koreans want to be a little bit more independent. They want their own deterrence, which might mean that at some point in the future they'll say goodbye to the American presence there if they feel they have it. Unfortunately, the only symmetrical deterrence with North Korea would be a nuclear deterrent, and that would set off a race around Asia to have nuclear weapons. Japan would probably quickly follow.
So earlier, there have been reports saying that South Korea could have become the first Asian country to join NATO's cyber group. Do you think the United States is actually planning a NATO enlargement to northeastern Asia?
I don't know that it's necessarily NATO in terms of its military side, but definitely on the technology war front. The U.S. is looking for that. You'll note that Canada has gone along with the Five Eyes and said they're going to ban ZTE Huawei. I think in his dreams, Biden would love to get Samsung to do the same. This is really an agenda about keeping things away from China as China expands into ASEAN, RCEP, et cetera, et cetera. So it's going to be really interesting to see how countries start reacting to this as they realize there's a choice between the economics of their future or security relations with the U.S.
But if you look at the size of trade between China and South Korea, and even China and Japan, do you think the U.S. planning is realistic, at least for the near future?
No, I don't, because neither the South Korea or Japan are willing to give up on the Chinese market, which is the largest growing market out there. If they, in essence, decide that they want to go all in with the United States, that would be pretty much the end of any kind of expansion. So look for them to look for the third way, a way in which they can remain neutral and still trade with China, but still as kind of fend off any direct threats to the military and security relations that they have with the U.S.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tangan in Beijing.